Alright, who's ready for more fucking Marxian analysis or some shit? It's probably not going to be directly Marxian analysis. In fact, it's... You always learn a lot here. I'm glad you learn a lot here. It's not going to be directly Marxian because, I mean, Georgists would end up agreeing with me on this. At least to some extent. But, you know, it is in fact analysis. Recently on Twitter, I saw some, you know, every time I open Twitter, there's some new discourse that's fucking stupid. And I don't realize that it's like, oh, I could make content on this and genuinely, like, have something to say about it until it's, like, gone. Because sometimes it just seems so stupid. But this one was significant enough that I, wanted to make a video about it. Now, ultimately, it is fake because it came from Reddit, and everything on Reddit is fake. Except for video game posts about, hey, how do I do X, Y, and Z? That stuff is real. Everything else isn't on Reddit, which includes this one, which was, I think, a guy saying that he lives in a, I forget if it was an apartment in the States or a flat in London or whatever, but he said his rent was really high, right? And like a lot of people in the modern world, he has trouble making rent each month. So, he did sexual favors for his landlord. Basically, he gave his landlord a blowjob. And then his landlord was like, okay, because you give me a blowjob, like, you don't have to pay rent this month. Or, like, offered, hey, if you give me a blowjob, I won't, you don't have to pay rent this month. And the guy did it. And then, cool, I mean, it's nice, I guess, that he doesn't have to pay rent, but at the same time, you only had to subject yourself to sexual exploitation, which is obviously the central topic of discussion over that scenario. Again, specifically, that scenario is likely fake because it's from Reddit, but there are, you know, I've read enough anecdotal horror stories and read enough, like, academic literature on the sort of dire circumstances that lead people into sex work and sexual exploitation in the first place to know that this kind of thing is real. And there were some people that seemed to think like, hey, this is a win-win situation. Landlord gets a blowjob, tenant doesn't have to pay rent this month, and all that. But what they didn't consider, and what some of them outright failed to understand at all, even when it was pointed out to them, was that this is sexual assault when this happens. Even if the tenant agreed to this arrangement, you know, for like the one-time thing or whatever, it is inherently the case that you can't really give informed consent when you are in the position of the tenant there, right? Like, I can't make rent every month. I can't make rent this month. My options are, I blow my landlord, or I get evicted and I'm homeless. There's no agency there. There's no real choice to be made where you don't get subjected to something horrible. So you have to take one of the two. And I guess they said, well, I'd prefer to have a roof over my head. So here we go. And that's coercion. That's coercion because the landlord could have just decided to waive rent for the month anyway, but they didn't. You know, they decided like, nah, you can do sexual favors for me, and then maybe I'll consider it. It's the same kind of thing that happens when people get a job at McDonald's and then complain about the poor working conditions at McDonald's. You'll see people being like, well, you took the job. That's disgusting. Yeah, it is. It's just a much more overt, much more visceral version of what people endure every day who are unemployed or underemployed, you know, working jobs that don't pay enough, is that, you know, you have two bad decisions, both of which make your life worse, but one of which is a lesser of two evils. And so you pick the one that makes your life less unbearable, knowing that the fallout from it is still going to suck. And there's a range of people online who can't comprehend that you shouldn't have to make that choice in the first place, you know? This kind of story doesn't happen if housing is guaranteed, because then there's nothing for a landlord. First, there wouldn't be a landlord, let's be real, if housing were guaranteed. But then in that case, if this person didn't have the problem of not being able to make rent, then there's no outside incentive for them to have sex with their landlord unless they're in like a relationship already or whatever. It's purely because of coercive factors that this happened in the first place. And it is a widespread problem, not just the like sexual favors thing, but just, you know, housing being withheld from people on the basis of rent leads to people's lives being worse, where it would be pretty easy to provide housing for people otherwise. That's why tenants unions exist. Something that I actually recently learned about. Apparently, tenants of a building will band together and create a union, much the same way that people in the workplace will. Humans, the smartest animals on Earth, are the only ones who pay for a place to live. Yeah, it's true, because we came up with this arbitrary concept that we call money, and we decided to ascribe moral value to people who have it, and moral vice to those who don't. And as a result, like, if you don't have money, then you're basically restricted from most things that make life livable or worth living, or, you know, whatever the case may be. You know, and this has been more or less the case throughout different eras of history, but it is especially the case in the modern day in what everybody loves to call late stage capitalism. You see, it really, before like the beginnings of mercantile capitalism and like colonial age capitalism in the US, what is now the US, there wasn't really a prevalent ideological through line of insulting people who are poor based on their perceived lack of merit. A lot of times when you go back and read stuff about the medieval age, a lot of the insults for poor people come from the fact that, oh, they're dirty and unclean, and I don't want to be around them. You know? That's what a lot of people think of. That's, in fact, what the historical texts, at least that I've read, support. It's only when the sort of enshrined legal status of like feudal lords went away, people all of a sudden need to invent some justification for why there was still poverty, because they couldn't admit that the system that they created, or that they were now living in, was still bad. But anywho, I think I would file this in the sort of like, in a similar sort of category as the "Don't Tip Your Landlord" video that I made, from back when that discourse was a thing. If you can believe it, there were landlords on TikTok unironically saying, "Hey guys, don't forget to tip your landlord every month." Like, motherfucker, I already pay rent. No, I'm not. Well, not me specifically, but I'm imagining that a renter is seeing this video and they're like, "Motherfucker, I already pay rent. I'm not giving you extra money." You know, especially considering that some places in the country rent is like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 per month. It's a lot. Like, if you're a landlord housing more than 2 people, you're fine. You do not struggle for expenses, or for money to meet expenses. I think in this case, like, as much as I would like to suggest a course of action for people who encounter this, there really isn't much of one to be had, aside from, I guess, like, form a tenants union or something like that. Or evict your landlord. There are more of you than there are of them. That's mostly facetious. It might be a bad idea to do that because the cops will come and protect the landlord. That's why the cops exist, etc., etc. Yeah. Ultimately, in this scenario, there wasn't a whole lot that could have been done in the moment.